In 1988, a terrible tragedy occurred in a wealthy suburb of Chicago. A local woman, Lori Wasserman, spiraled into madness, leading to her own death, the death of a young boy, and many other victims. This shocking event sent waves of panic through the community, sparking protests and calls for stricter safety measures in schools, as well as new laws regulating self-defense weapons. Lori Wasserman was born in 1958 to Norman and Edith Wasserman. She had an ordinary childhood with no major disruptions. However, from her adolescence, Lori struggled with insecurities about her appearance, especially disliking her nose. Some classmates teased her, which only deepened her feelings of inadequacy. Her parents, who were financially well off, helped her undergo plastic surgery, and after the procedure, Lori was finally pleased with her appearance. She blossomed into the beauty she had always wanted to be, or so she thought. But her appearance couldn't mask the mental issues that would later take a toll on her life. After high school, Lori attended the University of Arizona, aspiring to become a teacher. However, she struggled academically and was eventually expelled after 4 years. She wasn't interested in her studies anymore. Instead, her focus shifted to finding a rich husband. Lori thought she had found her ticket when she met a medical student, Stephen. She dropped out of school, believing he would become a successful doctor and provide her with the life she wanted. However, their relationship ended abruptly, devastating Lori. Unable to let go, she continued to pursue him for years. In 1980, Lori returned to Chicago, where she worked various odd jobs, including as a waitress at a country club. It was there that she met Russell Dann, the son of wealthy parents. He was impressed by Lori's beauty, and they quickly fell into a romantic relationship. Despite her ongoing mental health struggles, Russell didn't notice anything unusual at first, but once they moved in together and got married, his concerns grew. The couple lived in a house worth $230,000, which Russell's parents had bought for them. However, Lori's behavior became more troubling. She had no interest in work or maintaining their home. She didn't cook or clean, and she seemed completely uninterested in taking care of herself or her living space. Russell, who worked as a broker and was often exhausted, was frustrated by Lori's laziness. He even had to warn her about basic things like drying clothes before putting them away, as her habits often led to mold and other problems in their home. Russell tried to communicate his concerns to Lori, hoping she would change, but it only led to arguments. In an attempt to keep him around, Lori became increasingly obsessive. She tried to win him back through physical intimacy, believing it would make Russell happy. Lori's odd behavior escalated. She developed obsessive-compulsive tendencies, such as washing her hands whenever she saw a sink. She withdrew from social events and became a recluse, refusing to accompany Russell to any work-related meetings. Despite his love for her, Russell could no longer cope with her mental health issues, and they separated in May 1987, just before their third wedding anniversary. Lori was emotionally shattered by the separation, and when her parents were away on vacation in Florida, she convinced them to take her in. She believed she and Russell would reconcile, but he was firm in his decision to end the marriage. During their bitter divorce, Lori accused Russell of both physical and emotional abuse. Though there was no evidence to support these claims, she received $125,000 from the settlement, along with $1,250 a month in alimony for 3 years, which allowed her to avoid working. After the divorce, Lori's behavior grew even more erratic. Her obsession with cleanliness became more extreme, and she refused to shake anyone's hand or tolerate physical touch. She became increasingly paranoid and obsessed with her personal hygiene. Eventually, Lori's mental state deteriorated to the point where she began to show violent tendencies. In 1988, she snapped, and the consequences were tragic, culminating in a deadly chain of events. The horror of that day shocked the community, leading to widespread fear and calls for change in the way mental health issues and access to weapons were managed in society. In 1985, Lori Wasserman's mental health began to deteriorate during a difficult divorce. By 1986, things took a darker turn when her ex-husband, Russell, was attacked while sleeping. He was stabbed in the chest with an ice pick, narrowly missing his heart by just a few centimeters. Miraculously, he survived. The attack was mysterious. There were no clear enemies or signs of break-ins, and no one else had access to Russell's apartment. This made Lori the main suspect. A local hardware store clerk even recognized her as the person who had bought a similar knife. However, security footage didn't show her entering or leaving Russell's apartment, and Russell himself couldn't identify the attacker. Though he was sure it was Lori, especially because she had become jealous of his new girlfriend, there was no hard evidence linking her to the crime. Lori passed a polygraph test and was never charged. The police even suggested that Russell might have injured himself. At the time, they didn't pursue the case any further. Around the same time, Lori began obsessively contacting her first love, Dr. Stephen, whom she had dated during college. He had long since moved on, married, and had a family, but Lori claimed to be pregnant with his child, even though they hadn't seen each other in years. She also made disturbing calls, accusing him of sexually assaulting her. After some time, Stephen's lawyer intervened, sending a letter to Lori's parents urging them to get help for their daughter. This seemed to stop her harassment for a while, but it was clear that Lori's mental health was in decline. By January 1987, Lori felt completely alone. She had no relationship with her exes, and her parents were tired of dealing with her. In desperation, she decided to try working as a nanny, despite her growing instability. To outsiders, she appeared sweet and shy, making it easy for families to trust her with their children. However, strange incidents began to occur. On her first day working for one family, the children's furniture was shredded and several keys went missing. The family never reported it, but similar things kept happening at other clients' homes, involving stolen property and damaged goods. Lori denied any wrongdoing even when victims contacted the police. She rented an apartment for a while, but neighbors noticed strange behavior. Lori was hiding food scraps and meat in the cushions of her furniture, which caused everything to rot and stink. She would wander around the neighborhood aimlessly. Meanwhile, her father continued to cover for her, reimbursing victims for lost or damaged property. As Lori's condition worsened, her behavior became more erratic, and by 2010, it was clear she had completely lost touch with reality. Lori had moved to a university campus in Wisconsin, where her obsession with the TV remote control grew to the point where she couldn't stop clicking the buttons for hours. She also developed an obsession with numbers. Lori rarely showered, always wore gloves to avoid touching anything, and turned her dorm room into a filthy, rotting mess. The smell from her room became unbearable. She was arrested for shoplifting, and her father had to post $200 bail. Lori was placed in a program for first-time offenders, but this did little to improve her behavior. A month later, she set fire to one of the dorm rooms. There was no clear evidence she had done it, but most people believed she was responsible. By April, Lori's behavior had become more aggressive. FBI agents arrived to question her, but Lori had already left. A few days later, she returned to the home of a family she had worked for previously, asking to take their children to a fair. The family, unaware of Lori's mental health problems, agreed. However, Lori's true intentions were sinister. She had poisoned the food and drink she prepared for the children, though they discarded it after noticing a strange taste. Later that day, Lori set fire to the basement of the children's home, trapping their mother and them inside. The mother managed to escape with the children, though she was badly injured. A series of tragic events followed this incident. Lori's violent breakdown escalated further when she attacked a school, shooting one child and wounding several others before being confronted by a teacher who disarmed her. During the shooting, 8-year-old Nicholas Corwin was killed. After her rampage at the school, Lori left the scene and took a family hostage, claiming to have been the victim of a violent attack. She held them at gunpoint for over 6 hours, using their phone to contact her parents. Throughout the ordeal, Lori seemed detached from reality, apologizing to her mother for her actions but refusing to surrender. Eventually, Lori's father tried to intervene, but the situation escalated when Lori shot and severely wounded the head of the family. Cornered by authorities, she went upstairs and shot herself. Extensive psychological support was required for all the children and their families who had suffered at the hands of Lori. Property belonging to the school was also severely damaged, and several people were admitted to the hospital for poisoning. These victims were those who accepted food or drinks from Lori, which she had poisoned. Fortunately, the concentrations of poison were insignificant, and the unpleasant appearance and smell of the food deterred most people from trying it. Thankfully, everyone survived. It was later discovered that shortly before taking her own life, Lori had mailed 24 packages of poisoned food to all her friends and acquaintances in Wisconsin, California, and the suburbs north of Chicago. Fortunately, the recipients were warned, and the packages were seized before anyone was harmed. Psychiatrists were involved in the investigation to determine the exact motives behind Lori's crimes, but it was impossible to pinpoint a clear reason since Lori was already dead. She had no diaries where she could express her thoughts, and she didn't leave behind a suicide note that might reveal her motives. Over the last years of her life, she had regularly visited psychiatrists, but she was never diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. It was also suggested that she might have suffered from erotomania, a condition where an individual believes that others, especially men, are in love with them. This delusion is typical of certain mental health disorders, like the one Lori seemed to have. A toxicological examination revealed traces of the antidepressant anafranil in her system, as well as lithium, a drug used to treat bipolar disorder. Both of these medications are known to sometimes cause aggressive behavior in those who use them. Most of the questions during the investigation were directed at Lori's parents, who should have known about their daughter's severe psychological issues and should have placed her in psychiatric care much earlier. Had they done so, many of the victims might have been spared, but the family's failure to address Lori's mental health problems only worsened the damage she caused. The investigation revealed that after her divorce from her husband, Lori fell into a deep depression. Her condition worsened after she attacked her ex-husband, Russell. She sought help from a psychiatrist who traced the root of her issues to her childhood and upbringing. The divorce was especially difficult for Lori. She claimed that her ex-husband was abusive, but she also refused to let go of her feelings for him. Her harassment of Russell escalated to the point where she threatened him and his family. In April 1986, she accused him of burglary and vandalism at her parents' house, even though this accusation was completely false. Under the pretext of self-defense, Lori purchased a revolver. The police were concerned when they discovered she had a weapon, but her psychiatrist assured them that she was not a danger to anyone. Despite her continued harassment of her ex-husband, the situation briefly calmed down. However, Lori's behavior became more erratic, and she continued to call her former university boyfriend, even after he rejected her claim that she was pregnant with his child. In April 1987, Lori accused her ex-husband of raping her with a meat cleaver, but an examination found no physical evidence of such an assault. Lori, however, continued to insist that it had happened, and even managed to pass 2 lie detector tests, though no one believed her. Her ability to manipulate the tests only added to the confusion. By May 1987, Lori had accused Russell of trying to burn down her house, claiming that he had planted an incendiary device inside. This, too, could not be verified. Despite the bizarre nature of her accusations, her parents continued to support her unconditionally, dismissing concerns from law enforcement. A new psychiatrist worked with Lori, trying to help her manage her obsessive-compulsive disorder. But even this professional believed that Lori did not pose a danger to society. During this time, Lori bought a second revolver and later, a third. She was also prescribed medications to help manage her moods and obsessive behaviors. However, her condition only worsened. She developed a phobia of certain numbers and started to engage in bulimic behavior. By the end of 1987, she was preparing for something far more sinister. She stole books on poisons from the library and began studying arsenic and other chemical substances. Lori also began stealing wigs and other items from clothing stores, presumably to disguise her identity. Despite being caught during one of her thefts, her parents suggested she seek treatment, but Lori refused. She continued making threatening calls to her ex-boyfriends, their families, and others. In May 1988, the hospital where her former boyfriend worked once again received accusations of sexual harassment, all fabricated by Lori. Detectives concluded that Lori, who had once been a shy and beautiful young woman, had needed professional psychiatric help for a long time. Her untreated mental illness eventually led her to commit tragic acts, culminating in a shooting at a school, an event that caused widespread public outrage. This tragedy sparked debates about the need for stricter control over firearms, especially those purchased for self-defense. One of the hostages from the incident later became an advocate for gun control, speaking out on the issue from his hospital bed. Questions were also raised about the criteria for forcing individuals into psychiatric care. Many felt that the tragedy could have been avoided if Lori had received the treatment she needed. However, her refusal to undergo psychiatric care and her family's reluctance to intervene only exacerbated the situation. After the shooting, detectives were able to piece together some of the events leading to the tragedy. Lori's family refused to cooperate with the investigation, and they didn't provide her psychiatric records, making it difficult for authorities to understand her mental state. However, investigators did find newspaper clippings in Lori's room that detailed similar cases of individuals with obsessive-compulsive disorder committing violent acts. This led them to wonder if Lori had been inspired by these stories or if she saw them as a way to cope with her mental illness. Throughout her life, Lori had regularly made phone calls to her exes, relatives, and friends, many of whom were horrified by her behavior. Despite several visits to psychiatrists, the true extent of her mental illness was not recognized in time. Lori's family was criticized for failing to act sooner, and they were the subject of several lawsuits seeking compensation for the harm she caused. The outcome of these cases is unknown. Lori Dann was buried in an unmarked grave in a small private ceremony attended only by her parents and a few close relatives. The gravedigger was instructed not to reveal the location of her burial to anyone.